Before we get started with this video, I just want to go over some tips as it applies to BFR training. So with BFR training, a couple things I want you to be aware of is number one, what you're trying to do, the goal is to slow blood flow away from the limbs. So you have arteries that carry blood flow in. Arteries are a little bit deeper. So if you apply too much pressure, or if the strap you're using is too narrow and you apply too much pressure, like some of the things I've seen out there, then you could more likely occlude the arterial blood flow, which is what you don't want. The superficial venous blood flow, which are more close to the surface, that's what superficial means. The venous blood return is what carries the blood out of the limbs, out of the arms or legs. So when you're doing BFR training, the goal is really to only apply the right amount of pressure for the venous occlusion. So you're slowing the blood flow from leaving the limbs. So that's why what I always recommend is when you're tightening your bands, you want to make sure that you start, if we're talking about a qualitative scale of a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being tightest, you want to start at about a 5 to a 7. And I almost recommend starting a little bit less than you think. A lot of people actually over tighten, in my opinion, in the beginning, not realizing that anytime you do any strength training, you're actually doing occlusion training. You're occluding blood flow internally anytime you get a pump. So I recommend going a little bit less tight than you think, maybe a number 5 on a scale of 1 to 10, and then do a high volume warm up. Use very lightweight or bands, and you want to do a lot of repetitions, 20, 30 reps or more, and you want to do a lot of sets, 4 to 6 sets or more, with short rest periods, maybe 20 seconds of rest in between sets. And what you'll find is that after you finish that warm up, you'll go from being a 5 to about a 7, so you'll be at optimal pressure. Another thing I highly recommend is just checking throughout the workout, putting your thumb into the palm of the hand, and just looking at how fast the color refills. Optimal pressure, they say, is usually about a 2 to 3 seconds in refill time. If it's less than 2 seconds, that probably means that it's too loose, and if it's more than 3 seconds, that means it's probably too tight. And if at any time you have any numbness, tingling, any pain whatsoever, take the bands off or loosen them because they're most likely too tight. Another misconception is that you should be wearing the bands closer to the joint if, for example, you're training forearms or calves. It's a big misconception. You actually don't need to do that, and you don't want to do that. There's a lot of nerves near the elbow and near the knee, and you don't want to put pressure on those nerves, so it's not necessary. The other thing about BFR training, the great thing about it is that it has a systemic effect. And what that means is that when you wear them on the upper arms, for example, even if you train chest and back, you're getting a benefit for chest and back. A lot of people think that it's really just for arms or quads, whatever muscle is closest to where you're actually putting the strap. It's not true. It has a systemic effect. So it's tapping into your brain, which makes changes throughout the body, as well as making changes in your biochemistry in the blood flow. So just remember, it's not just for biceps and triceps, it's not just for quads and glutes. It actually does have a big benefit for forearms and grip and calves, even when you wear it at the top of the thighs or at the top of the arms. So now let's talk about your specific bands. Now let's talk about your quad wrap BFR bands. So these are about 80 inches long, which is very similar to knee wraps, except you'll notice that they're extra thick. This material is much nicer, much more comfortable, much more premium than your typical knee wraps. That's the first thing you'll notice. The other thing you'll notice is a long portion of soft Velcro, so that when you're wrapping it around the upper leg, no matter what your leg size, you should be able to have enough soft Velcro to be able to secure it in place, so it applies to pretty much everyone. And then the other cool thing, you have this numbering system. So it's less complicated than you think. I know some people get confused by how do I use these numbers. I'm going to show you in just a second exactly how to use them. But essentially we put numbers on both sides so that when you're wrapping around to get that first wrap, that you can use these finger loops. You slide both fingers into here so that way it doesn't slip. So when you're wrapping it around, it doesn't move around, it stays in place. And then you can see which numbers line up. So when I'm wrapping it around, I'll show you in a second how you can see, okay, for my leg, optimal pressure is a 10 and a 2 on this leg, and that way I know that I want to match that most likely on the other leg. So let me go ahead and show you exactly how to use these finger loops and how to get this wrapped around the upper leg. So to get this started, essentially what you're going to do is you're going to line it up at the top of the thigh, right below the gluteal fold. And what you'll do is, again, you're going to start this so that the wrap goes all the way over. And what you're the thing you're doing with the numbering system is all you're doing is noting, what number is on my leg here and what number is underneath here. So this is 10 here, for example, and this is lining up with number 4. It's really just supposed to be a very simple system, so that way you can say, okay, these two numbers line up on this leg, so I know I need to do the same thing on the other leg. And you could use, really any of these numbers for reference. I'm just using the 10 because it's at the end and it's kind of easiest to see. But, for example, for me, I might tighten it to a 10 and a 5. And I'm using these finger loops to hold this in place so that this band doesn't slip out of my hands. So I'm holding this with one hand and I'm holding the finger loops with the other hand, holding it in place so this, just to get it started, it doesn't slip. So that way you can keep it all in place. And then again, I'm lining it up and I'm looking. You can either look at the top number and this bottom number, or you can look at this number and the number underneath. It doesn't really matter. Whatever you prefer. We put those numbers in place so you can kind of keep track as to which numbers line up on this side, because those are the numbers I want to line up on the other side. And that's pretty much it. Then you're going to wrap it around. You can cover these loops if you want. And you'll wrap it around and wrap it around until you get all of it. And then you'll see you have a long portion of Velcro to attach to. And that's it.